Good morning, everybody. The time is now 11:30 and it's time for me to resume these hearing sessions into the Corby Part 2 local plan. Now, for the benefit of those that have just joined us for this session, I will go through some elements of my opening remarks just to set the scene and provide information on how we're going to operate our session today. But firstly, can I just check the technology that we have everybody for this session? I believe we have Mr. Jameson for the council solicitor.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jameson. Mr. Begley, the council planning officer.
Ma'am, thank you.
Thank you. We have Phoebe Juggings.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Good, thank you. And we have Catherine Seddon.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Kirsty Clifton from the Department of Education.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Yep, lovely. Thank you very much. So as I said, my name is Helen Harkenhall and I am a Chartered Town Planner and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Corby Part 2 local plan. I'll just say a little bit about the organisation of the virtual hearing. The hearings will take the form of a structured discussion based on the matters, issues and questions that have already been published on the council's website. I will lead the hearing and ask the questions and invite people one at a time to contribute to the discussion. Responses should be directed to me. Usually I will start with the council and ask them to explain the reasons why they've approached a policy in a particular way. I will then invite other parties to take part in the discussion. In turn, please don't attempt to talk unless invited to do so. If you want to speak on a particular matter or speak again on a particular matter, please just raise your hand through the raise hand facility and then I will invite you to join the discussion at a suitable juncture. So during the event, unless you are speaking, it's helpful if everyone can please keep their microphone muted to minimise background noise. Also, it may be helpful to turn cameras off if you're not speaking, just really to help with bandwidth if we are having a few issues with unstable broadband. If you become disconnected from the event for some reason or on a future event, then you can't connect, please contact the programme officer immediately by email or by telephone, and he'll do his best to assist you whenever he can and ensure that you can join the session again. When you finish speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off and lower your hand. So for the benefit of third parties who may be watching this event live on YouTube, when you refer to a document, can you please try and refer to the full title and examination reference rather than by some abbreviation or some form of acronym. The hearing, as you know, is being live streamed via the internet and a copy of that recording will be kept on the council's website. At the end of the hearing, I will end the session and ask all the participants to log out. Please can you also make sure you attend the whole session from start to finish and avoid leaving the screen except during the breaks. Now this session should carry on till around 1 o'clock. We may finish a little early, but that's absolutely fine. But we intend to finish no later than 1 o'clock today, and then we'll take a lunch break for our rest of our sessions this afternoon. So are there any questions from anybody about how we intend to proceed? No, it's quiet, so I'll take that as a no. That's excellent. So in terms of this session, we're looking at today infrastructure and services. Firstly, I want to just really ask a more general question about the infrastructure requirements to enable the growth envisaged through the Part 2 local plan. And then I'll go on to the specific policies 1 to 5 we're going to look at this morning. So firstly, in terms of the Northamptonshire Authority's annual monitoring report, it shows there's some really good progress being made, in overall terms, in terms of infrastructure. Can I turn to the council first of all? I think it's probably Mr. Begley, just to look at what infrastructure requirements are needed and have been identified within the infrastructure delivery plan in brief terms, to ensure that the growth that's envisaged can come forward with the necessary infrastructure in place?
Thank you, ma'am. The North Northamptonshire Strategic Infrastructure Plan demonstrates that the growth in Corby can be, the growth set out in the Joint Core Strategy in Part 2 that can be accommodated. The key infrastructure project that is identified in it is the Corby Northern Orbital Road, Phase 2. That's the final link of that road. And that's the only actual specific infrastructure that's related to this borough.
I did note from the North Northamptonshire annual monitoring report that some good progress has been made in terms of the various infrastructure required to support growth. That report, from my assessment of it, tends to concentrate on transport infrastructure, in particular, as you say, the North Orbital Road and other highway improvements that are required more regionally, shall we say, or certainly cross-boundary infrastructure. Are there any issues in relation to other elements of infrastructure that may affect how growth can come forward over the local plan period? So in particular, I'm thinking about wastewater capacity or health, for example. We'll come on to education later. We have a specific question on that with secondary school education. But in particular, are there any issues in relation to other infrastructure that may impinge on the implementation of the plan?
There's no specific infrastructure that will impinge on the implementation of the plan, but the Northamptonshire Investment Framework at page 37 sets out some of the infrastructure investment priorities for Corby, and it acknowledges, as you say, the majority is transport, but it also includes education and green infrastructure.
And are there any particular issues relating to that at the moment that you're aware of, that something may be delayed, that may impact on the growth aspirations of the Part 2 plan?
No, there's not one.
Right. So you are confident that the necessary infrastructure will be in place to support the growth that's envisaged?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That's backed up by the investment framework.
Right. Thank you very much. I think then what I want to do then is move on to policy 1, which relates to open space, sport and recreation. My first question in the MIQs related to how robust and up to date that assessment was in terms of the needs of open space, sport and recreation. And I'm content with the information you've provided in your hearing statement on that particular element. And I also note that Sport England have confirmed that they are happy that the assessments that have been undertaken accord with their guidance and are robust. So I don't think we need to dwell on that any further. What I do want to have a look at, though, is the age of the evidence that you have to support the plan. In particular, Sport England have made reference to the fact that their guidance recommends that a review be undertaken every 3 years. So really the question is that evidence, is that still up to date, or does it need to be updated?
The evidence, I acknowledge Sport England said it needs to be updated every 3 years. So the evidence as it stands is currently up to date. The way policy 1 is written is to acknowledge that they need to be updated, they need to be subject to monitoring and updating. It says policy 1 makes reference to the latest open space, sport and recreational facilities or similar subsequent documents. I think documents are up to date.
Yeah, I know that. Thank you. Yes, I think they are up to date for the purposes of this particular local plan. Do you have a view on Sport England's suggestion that there should be an amendment to the supporting text to the local plan to set out that by 2022 a new playing pitch strategy will be produced? Do you have a view on that suggestion?
I feel as reference is included within the policy for subsequent documents, I don't think it's necessary.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay. Can I look at that, whether policy one is consistent with paragraph 97 of the framework? And can I ask for your view on that, please?
Policy not is that do we mean paragraph 96 of the framework?
97 I'm looking at the moment, which for reference, there are 3 bullet points there to say existing open space should not be built on unless, and then there are 3 elements there that it suggests. In particular, I'm looking at bullet point B. Can I have your views on whether you feel that the policy as currently drafted is consistent with the framework?
Yes, the policy as currently drafted mirrors policy 7 of the joint core strategy, and that is consistent with paragraph 97 of the NPPF.
Okay, can I in particular just have a look at bullet point B of paragraph 97 of the framework, which just for your reference, it said the loss resulting from the proposed development will be replaced by equivalent or better provision in terms of quantity and also quality. So what I'm interested here really is in terms of quantity. As drafted, bullet point B of policy 1 makes reference to equivalent quality and accessibility. What I want to ask is comments about quantity. In order for that policy to be sound, for it to be in compliance with the framework and consistent with the framework, does it need to address the issue of quantity as well as quality? Mr. Begley, you're muted at the moment, sorry.
Apologies.
All right.
Policy 1 mirrors policy 7 the joint core strategy. It doesn't have quantity, but criteria A, the facility is surplus to requirements. To me, that implies a quantity assessment.
I suppose what policy 1 is trying to say is that if found the result in a loss will only be permitted if a site of equivalent quality and also quantity can be provided. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. Bullet point A, yes, looks at whether a facility is surplus, but the issue I think we may need to explore a little further is whether or not that is required that not the replacement open space not just is to be of equivalent quality, but is also of equivalent quantity.
Sorry, I don't know whether I can help. I've got my hand raised.
That's fine, Mr. Jameson. Yeah, please, by all means, just assist us.
I understand entirely where you're coming from, and whilst there might be a route through policy 1 to suggest that it is embracing quantity, then I'm sure that a minor but main modification, it's a minor point, but there's a main modification to be to say a site of equivalent quality and quantity. I'm sticking my neck out, but I can't see that there would be any objection to that if you think that would assist to make it compliant with paragraph 97, Mum.
I think that might be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Jameson, for that suggestion. I think, yes, just looking at the wording of paragraph 97, clearly this is the up-to-date framework. This is the 2019 framework, and the Troll strategy was adopted before that document. So I know there's not a great deal of difference between the 2012 and 2019, but just to be reflective of the most up-to-date national policy, I think that might be something suitable to consider. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
We'll stick that on our list, Mum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay then, can I now have a look at what is in effect the third paragraph of that policy, and the justification for requiring all development over 10 or more dwellings or 0.3 hectares to provide open space and outdoor sports facilities. What is the justification for that?
The basis of the threshold is that developments below 10 dwellings may be too small or restricted in other ways for the provision of open space, sport and recreation facilities to be practical.
Right, so effectively by setting a threshold of 10 units or more, that is really the major threshold, isn't it, in terms of how we normally determine applications. It's usually a major application if it's 10 units or more. I think in your statements you make reference to a possible change to the actual site area to bring that in line with the definition of a major development. Is that correct?
Right. They suggested that we move it to 0.5 hectares.
Yeah, I think from a consistency point of view, that may be a good way forward, and I'm pleased that you've suggested that in your hearing statement. So thank you for that. Can I also ask, just in terms of policy 1, in order for that policy to be effective, and it might be covered somewhere else in other supporting policy documents, it doesn't make reference to the management or the maintenance of public open space. Is that something that you felt was necessary to make the policy effective?
It's not felt it's necessary for the policy to be effective, but the Part 2 local plan does say that requirements can be identified in a supplementary planning document, which I think could cover them aspects.
Yes, that's right, it does. And can you explain to me a little bit more? Paragraph 4.14 of the Part 2 plan does make reference to that. So the further explanation on the operation of the policy may be provided in a supplementary planning document. So is it the case that that is going to be provided rather than it may be an SPD? What's the council's view on this? What are you planning, and what will that SPD cover?
We've only started the initial scoping of the SPD, but it certainly is a commitment to produce one. I think it's necessary.
Right, okay. And is that going to be a joint document throughout the North Northamptonshire authorities, or is it one that Corby yourselves are wishing to pursue?
It will be a Corby Borough specific document, and we need to produce it before the unitary of April 2021.
Right, so that's my next question actually, was the time frame for it. So it's April 21?
Yeah, it will need to be, yeah.
Okay, and are you looking for that document then to go through a consultation process?
Yes.
Is that identified in your LDS as a piece of work?
It's not at the moment. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the LDS, but it's not.
No, but some authorities do put those documents in the LDS, I know, just for a complete picture, which is absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you. Right, and I don't. Yes, the final question I asked in the MIQ is related to the whether that policy applied to larger scale sites such as SUEs, and I'm content with the council's response on that in the hearing statement. So we don't need to pursue that any further. Mr. Jameson, you still got your hand up. Do you wish to come back on anything in relation to this policy?
No, ma'am, that's an error on my part. I apologise.
It's all right, don't worry. We're all trying to get used to this technology, I know. No problem at all. Right, in that case then, I want to move on to policy 2, which looks at health and well-being. Perhaps, Mr. Begley, you could start by just providing a little bit of background to this policy and why it's necessary to be included within Part 2 local plan.
The background evidence and responses from consultation have highlighted that health and wellbeing is a serious issue in Corby. There's a number of elements within the Joint Core Strategy which address health and wellbeing, and it was felt, given the issues in Corby, to pull these together in a sort of overarching health and wellbeing policy to emphasise the importance in Corby and to make it easier to implement. As a result of the inspector's questions, there's a modifications suggested which we think would make the policy more effectively to be operated easier.
Would you like us to go through those, please? Particularly for those watching this on the live stream.
The Part 2 local plan talks about, in a couple of places, about needing technical assessments. We feel it'd be clarified if we actually identify within this policy that a health impact assessment would be required to support applications, and that would be a way of tying back the planning application to the overarching elements of the policy, and that would be for major development schemes.
Right, yes, that's right. I've got that wording in front of me here. Yes, that's a requirement for a health impact assessment will be for major developments of 10 units or more, or 0.5 of a hectare of site area. Can I ask, would there be a different level of health impact assessment required for different size of developments? In other words, would the scope of that document reflect the scale of the development?
I think a health impact assessment would have to be proportionate to the scale of the development.
Right, okay, thank you. Yes, no, that's helpful. So that would come forward as a main modification in terms of additional supporting paragraph 0.9. You're also proposing a modification to the policy itself to provide a health impact assessment. Right, so in terms of that policy, one or two comments, I think, or questions, shall I say, from me, in terms of the actual detailed wording. Paragraph, bullet point A looks at contributing to high quality, attractive, walkable and safe environment. My question related to what is the definition of walkable and whether or not, as drafted, the policy is effective. Mr. Begley, you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry, I was asking a colleague. We have covered the definition of walkable under another matter.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I think in different areas there are definitions of walkable. I think 200 metres is one. I think it's very often used in highway assessments.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get this information.
Okay. Well, would you like me to come back to that? We can do that if that's helpful.
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. What I'll do is we'll come back to that shortly. I think that's probably the best way forward. What I wanted just to have a conversation about with you, really, examine a little bit more detail in terms of air quality in particular, which clearly is an important element that needs to be addressed. Part D of the policy looks at that and requires that development proposals should promote, support and enhance health and well-being by monitoring to ensure there is no further decline in air quality. I just want to explore what is the expectation of the council in terms of a particular development proposal, and is the policy effective?
Our response to your questions confirms that Corby has no air quality management areas, and the purpose of point B is to monitor that and ensure that proposal is not in any way sort of edging it into that category.
Right, okay, I can understand that that aspiration and that objective. I think what just concerns me slightly in terms of the policy wording on the supporting text is, if I was a developer putting in the planning application, would it be clear to me what would be required? And as a decision maker, what would the local authority be looking for in terms of air quality?
I think this is where the introduction of a health impact assessment really makes the policy effective, and that's the sort of information we would expect to be set out in that.
So so what are you saying is that you would you be looking for an air quality assessment to be submitted with the planning application? Is that what you're looking for? I'm thinking in practical terms, how would a developer or a development meet the criteria within policy 2, and what is it clear what would be expected?
I think we do have a joint core strategy, paragraph 4.5, which states where development will impact through air and light pollution, especially on designated sites, it will be only permitted where measures can be put in place to minimise or eliminate impacts to a level that provide a high standard of protection of health and environmental quality. This policy is sort of bringing that to prominence, and it's through the health impact assessment that they would need to demonstrate that they comply with the joint core strategy and subsequently this part 2. So I think it is the introduction of that health impact assessment really is making it effective and helping us implement JCS and policy 2, seeking to encourage high quality.
Right, okay. I'm sorry to sort of dwell on this point again, but I'm just concerned that the wording of the policy isn't necessarily effective in terms of what it's saying is that a development proposal must monitor to ensure there is no further decline in air quality. You could take that to mean that there needs to be ongoing monitoring when a development is in place, or are you really just looking at development to provide an air quality impact assessment at application stage to demonstrate that there was a technical exercise been undertaken to show that the development would not exacerbate or make air quality issues worse in that particular location? It's that understanding, I think, as a developer, in practical terms, what is that policy requiring me to do?
Yeah, I think clarity could be provided, but how I see it is that they need to demonstrate that the measures that they can put in place for that application will minimise or eliminate the impacts of their development.
Yeah.
It's just demonstrating how they satisfy the joint core strategy. And yeah, I guess.
Maybe it's one I think it might be better if I leave this with you as something to just have a look at. Obviously, you know the issue that I'm raising, so I think maybe if it's something for the council just to review in future, just to see whether or not there can be some clarity in wording either in the policy or in the supporting text, just to cover that particular issue.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
I think that's probably the best way forward on that. Okay, thank you. Anything from anybody else in terms of policy 2, health and well-being? No, Mr. Jameson, you're happy? Right, in that case, I will move on to policy 3, which relates to the secondary school opportunity sites. And we have colleagues from the Department of Education to help us with this particular one. I think what would be helpful as a starter to start our discussions on this is firstly for the council just to outline the need for secondary school provision in terms of infrastructure to support growth in the plan. And then we can bring in the representatives of the Department of Education to look at the more depth and the more detail of the policy and the proposal itself. So Mr. Begley, I will turn to you, please. So if you can just start off our discussions on this to outline the need for a new secondary school in the borough to support the growth.
Thank you. The need for a secondary school is long-term need that's been identified in the North Northamptonshire Infrastructure Delivery Plan. It's becoming urgent as that delivery plan's becoming a number of years old now, and we also relied on background information from located and the Northamptonshire County Council, which reinforces that there is a pressing need for a new secondary school in Corby.
And that particular need, is that in a particular area of the borough or is this borough-wide?
It is borough-wide.
So that need is that on the basis of existing population and in particular the birth rates and the growth of young people in the borough, or does that need take account of the additional needs from future growth?
It's my understanding that, yeah, it does take into account additional needs for future growth.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of what the need is, what sort of size of secondary school is required to meet the needs of the borough?
Right, there was a size because that impacted on the size that could be accommodated.
Okay, I'll move on. I think I'll probably ask the other parties to help on some of these points. Clearly, a need has been established for a secondary school within the borough. And can you just outline for me briefly the work that's been undertaken to assess where what alternatives there are and how the council have come to the conclusion that this particular site on Arundel Road North is the preferred location?
The background paper was prepared in partnership with Located, and that set out a detailed assessment of potential sites to accommodate the new secondary school based on the sustainability objectives. There was 11 sites assessed against the sustainability criteria. And as explained in response to your questions, Arundel Road North site was the third highest scoring site against the assessment criteria, with the higher scoring sites being discounted following the assessment stage. And that was 2 sites were discounted based on the size, and also the other one was already a strategic employment allocation in the joint course strategy.
Right, okay, yes, I'm aware of that. Look at the 11 sites were considered. They were then whittled down to a short list of 3. One of those in particular, just ask a little bit more about that. I think it's the site at Courier Road, which is the site that's been allocated for employment uses. Why was that rejected? I appreciate it's indicated for employment use, but if there is such an underlying need for secondary places within the borough, was that an appropriate choice for that site? Was it a suitable site in all other respects for a secondary school, or were there other issues that needed to be taken account of?
It did score highly. So the primary reason was that it wasn't policy compliant with the JCS. It's appreciated there is a pressing need for education, but the plan also needs to meet its requirements for employment and jobs. And that's the reason.
It does. Sorry to interrupt. I know it's certainly it does, but I'm just trying to ascertain the council's thinking behind the fact that the Courier Road site, which clearly scored very similar to the sites at Arundel Road North that's been selected, but I'm just trying to explore and understand a little bit more why that was rejected. Were there any other issues besides the fact that it was allocated for employment use and was close to other existing employment area? Were there any other issues that tended to suggest that it wasn't the best location for a secondary school site?
In terms of sort of identifying the site as a potential education site, one of the key issues was also deliverability. The landowner wasn't willing to sell, and
Right.
a deliverability issue is a key issue as well.
Right, okay. All right, thank you for that. Can I just ask a little bit more about the school itself then? I think my understanding and my reading of the evidence I've got, particularly from the Department of Education, is that there is a requirement for a 1,500 place school, is that correct? And that includes a sixth form. Does that sound about right?
That's right.
Yes, and
Yes, I can confirm that from DFE's perspective.
thank you very much. Sorry, who was that? Sorry.
It's Phoebe Juggins at DFE.
All right, thank you, Phoebe. How wide is the catchment area of this new school? What area is it envisaged that it would cover? I'm not sure whether Mr. Bailey can answer that, or one of our other colleagues.
Hi, Mum. It's Catherine Seddon from the DFE. At the moment, the catchment area hasn't been defined because the school is at an early stage. On many occasions, schools don't have a catchment area initially, but then one is developed once the precise need is known from pupils in the area.
Okay, thank you. So is there an approximate catchment area? What I'm trying to get at, I suppose, is that I am aware that there is another secondary school proposed to serve the West Corby SUE, the Sustainable Urban Extension,
Yeah.
Which is clear to the western side of Corby. So this school, is this looking to provide for so the northern eastern sections of Corby, or is that this?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we anecdotally we'd looked at 3 to 5 miles, but probably 3 miles in that area.
Right, okay, thank you. That's helpful, thank you. Now, in terms of this particular proposal, the policy wording, policy 3, looks at this as a secondary school opportunity site. And I think in paragraph 4.22 of the local plan, the supporting text suggests the council is aware of a proposal for a new secondary school to the east of Weldon. I suppose my question is, does there need to be some sort of update here because the things have moved on a little bit to make the plan effective? Mr. Begley?
Yeah, I don't think we can update it really. This policy was put in to facilitate the sort of to move it forward. As far as I'm aware, there's still constraints to be discussed in the Department of Education in discussions with our development managing officers.
Right, okay, that's all right, that's fine, thank you. Can I just ask why the site was called an opportunity site rather than just saying we're allocating a piece of land here for a secondary school? The policy refers to it as a secondary school opportunity site. What was in the council's mind in doing that?
We know there's a pressing need for a school. We've done the evidence and looked at the other sites to see what the most sustainable site is, and this was sort of come out best in that. But there's still a number of constraints that need to be overcome. So we didn't feel we was in a position to allocate it as a site until these constraints have been addressed. So really, that's just, by putting this policy in, we felt we could support them discussions and support overcoming those constraints.
Right, okay, that is helpful actually. Yes, so what you are saying is that you're not actually allocating this site specifically as for a secondary school, that it is just a potential site that has been through a process of assessment and selection. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, right, okay, that's good. That helps understanding. Thank you very much. Okay then. If we look at the site itself at Arundel Road North, one of my questions in my MIQs was whether the site was available, sustainable, suitable and deliverable. So can we address those issues now, please? Mr. Begley, you're on mute at the moment.
The site is available. We've located the Department of Education and they confirm that the landowner is willing to sell the land with a price agreed, subject to securing planning permission. Our background evidence demonstrates that the site is sustainable, and in terms of deliverable, this policy really is facilitating those discussions to make it deliverable. It's ongoing really to overcome them constraints.
Right, okay, so that brings us actually quite neatly onto the constraints and the difficulties of bringing this site forward that you have already mentioned on a few occasions already this morning. So perhaps you could explore those a little bit more and outline for me, what are the constraints, what are the difficulties in bringing this site forward?
The sort of the difficulties that need to be addressed are set out in paragraph 4.24 of the Part 2 local plan. And that's issues around highways, traffic impacts, creating connections with the sustainable urban extensions, and also exploiting opportunities to link into green infrastructure in the wider open countryside.
Right, okay. So just looking at those in a little bit more depth, are any of those are causing a particular concern at the moment that they may impact on the deliverability of the site? They might delay the provision of the new secondary school?
Discussions ongoing and positive with development management. Our colleague Department of Education but as far as I'm aware, there's no reason why it can't be progressed.
Right, okay, thank you. Are any parties from the Department of Education, are you able to help us on this point? To explain why things are up to, the constraints that you are trying to tackle at the moment?
Yeah, I can step in there. Initially, it's Catherine Seddon from the DFE. As part of the process of bringing the site forward, we've done a number of surveys, transport ecology, archaeology, trying to remember all of them now, in order to assess the site. And we've submitted those initial surveys to the council initially in August 2019. So far we're waiting for a formal response, but we have met with the council on 2 or 3 occasions to explain the situation, run through those plans, and we've also now appointed a contractor with a dedicated planning consultant who's Kirsty Clifton, who's on this call as well, to continue that work and continue that dialogue with the Development Management Department at the council. Kirsty, I don't know if you want to step in.
Really just as an update, we have taken the advice that's been received from development management to date via minutes and meeting notes, and effectively the control option that was prepared as part of that early pre-application consultation has been, we're looking to develop that, and discussions are in hand with additional site assessments taking place. We, at this point in time, don't see there to be any obstruction to bringing forward a full planning application for the site. There's nothing as yet that has been highlighted over and above what you've seen already. We will obviously have to carefully consider how connections to, for instance, the SUE to the west and obviously Tresham Village are considered as part of that. But from a highway infrastructure perspective, the feasibility that was carried out early doors alongside the DfE's work identified that you could provide for that and accommodate the sort of future growth that was expected, because the site effectively sits between those two. So from my perspective as the planning consultant for the contractor and on behalf of the DfE, I don't at this point see anything that would prevent us from progressing that quite quickly.
Right, okay, that's great. So effectively, yes, there are some constraints, but you don't feel that they are insurmountable, that they can be resolved following discussion with all the parties involved. That's helpful. Do you have a time frame when you consider the planning application may be submitted? What's your project plan?
Ideally, what we're looking to do is by Christmas this year, we would like to have an application in, if we are to meet the deadline for opening in September 2022, to meet the sort of, I suppose, the deficit in places that's been identified particularly. So given this type of development, it's very specific in terms of when we can get on site. So ideally we would be looking at wanting to start on site by sort of the summer, next summer at the very latest.
Right, okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Can I just come back to Mr. Begley? One thing that we should have explored in a little bit more depth in terms of selecting the site. Clearly, the site that we have here under consideration is within the open countryside, which raises certain policy considerations, as it is not within an urban area. So what justification do the council feel that there is to provide a site in the open countryside adjoining the urban area for this particular use?
Justification is really the pressing need, and that we have carried out an assessment of alternative sites, and there is nowhere else to accommodate it.
Right, okay, that's fine. I think you have covered it in the hearing statements that you have produced on the Department of Education as well. But that's helpful, thank you. Right, I think that's probably all I need to address in terms of policy 3 and the secondary school. The only question I think I'll put to you, Mr. Begley, is I might understand that what you're going to say in terms of answer here is, in terms of putting the policy together, you have in the supporting text set out a series of what you might call design principles that support and guide the development of a new school. With the other allocations in the plan, you have provided those particular design principles as part of the policy itself. What was the council's thinking in this particular case? Because those particular design principles, as I said, aren't within the policy itself. So is that an effective way forward? What's the council's view on that?
I think the difference is the other sites where we put site design principles, they were allocations where we've gone through the design workshops and we've worked up those site design principles. This was not an allocation, and it was felt it was too early in the process really to start incorporating them and putting them in policy. So some of the sort of key features were put in the supporting text rather than the policy.
Right, okay, that's what I thought the response you were going to make, but I thought I'd ask the question anyway, just to be clear. Okay, that's fine, thank you. The only other thing that that maybe is missing in there that I would like to discuss with you is, in terms of accessibility of the site, those design criteria look at the impacts of traffic and car parking. Does it need to be strengthened in terms of looking at non-car means of travel, such as walking, cycling, public transport?
Yes, I think that'd be a good idea.
Right, okay. In that case, I will leave that for you to have a look at after the close of the examination hearings, to look at how you can strengthen that particular paragraph in the supporting text there to make reference to that. I'm sure it's something that will be considered, from the evidence I've seen so far. It looks like clearly that will be fed into the development and the design of the proposal. But I think it would be helpful if that is included as an additional bullet point within paragraph 4.23. Right, okay, so anything further from anybody in particular in relation to policy 3, particularly other participants? Is there anything further, any further comments you wish to make in support of this particular policy?
Nothing from my perspective, thanks, Mum.
No, I think that's fine then, if we're all happy. That's good. In that case then, I will move on and to look at policy 4, which relates to electronic communications. Just to ask the council, is that policy consistent with paragraph 112 of the framework in making provision for the next generation technology?
Yes, the policy accords with the NPPF in terms of supporting the expansion of electronic communications.
Can you expand on that, please, and demonstrate how it does that?
The policy should be read together with policy 10 of the JCS. And this element of the policy ensures that the expansion of electronic communication is designed and installed to avoid street clutter and ensure that there's not a negative impact on visual amenity.
Right, okay, thank you. Yes, certainly it needs to be read in terms of policy 10. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's all I need to ask on policy 4. That leads us nicely then on to policy 5, which looks at, policy 4. Before we move on, I think there is a modification to that policy, is that correct?
Yes, the deletion of only.
Right, and what's the thinking behind that modification?
Give it a bit of flexibility.
Right, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it is probably quite strictly worded otherwise, isn't it, with the only in the policy wording. Okay. Right, yeah, I think I'm happy with that, thank you. So moving on then to policy 5, bad neighbour uses. This is quite a specific policy that looks in particular about water recycling centres and the potential issues that they arise in terms of environmental issues. Could the council just provide me with a little bit of background to this policy, just to relate it to the needs and the particular issues within the borough?
Yeah, this is a policy that's been rolled forward from our 1997 Corby Local Plan. Development management have found it as a helpful policy. It clarifies that bad neighbours uses will be a material consideration in dealing with plan applications.
Okay, is there a particular issue within the borough? This is what has led to this policy?
Only that Corby has a large legacy of employment and industrial uses. I think that's probably the basis of the policy and why it's remained popular.
Right, okay, and this particular policy, it doesn't look at what you could argue are other bad neighbour uses. It is quite specific, rather than being a more generic policy that looks at say in general bad neighbour uses, which could be a whole range of industrial processes, it could be agriculture, it could be water related. Can you just explain the background to this and why you feel that it needs to be, say, restricted to those particular types of uses?
I think the background is the 1997 Corby Local Plan. Concerns that of having development so close to the water recycling centres.
Right, okay, so are there any other bad neighbours in the borough that would justify a policy of this particular type, this protectionist policy, for certainly to protect the amenity of residents that may live in a certain proximity? The policy looks at intensive lifestyle units, but then it doesn't look at potentially other types of uses that might cause bad neighbour issues in terms of noise or odours.
The basis of the policy appears to be on odour, which is why them particular uses have been picked out.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so do the council feel there is a need for the policy to be widened to look at other uses that potentially could result in odour issues, or are you content that it's effective as it's currently drafted?
We have, I think it's effective as it's currently drafted. Initially it was just water recycling. We have sort of expanded to other bad neighbours. So I think it's effective as it is. Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Right. I don't know if there's anything else I need to ask on that particular policy. Is there anything else from any other participants before we just close this session about infrastructure generally? Any other participants wish to make any further comments? No, we've got no hands up, so that looks like everybody's happy. Okay, so in that case then, I think that's all I need to address in terms of infrastructure today. So thank you very much, everybody, for your assistance. So I will adjourn the hearing and close this particular session. We are returning this afternoon, as you all know, to look at other policies of the plan. So thank you very much for your participation. And I'll now adjourn the hearing now until 2 o'clock, when we'll resume this afternoon. Thank you very much.